There comes a moment in every life when the weight feels unbearable. When you wake up and your first thought is a quiet whisper, "I do not know if I can keep going." Maybe it is exhaustion from carrying responsibilities that never seem to lighten. Maybe it is the slow, painful disappointment of trying again and again with nothing to show for it. Or maybe it is that silent fear, the fear that you are not enough, that you are falling behind while everyone else seems to move forward. This opening moment is not weakness. It is the point where doubt grows loud and hope grows quiet. And yet, history shows us something remarkable. This very moment, the one where you feel closest to giving up, is often the doorway to transformation. It is where ordinary people find extraordinary strength. It is where new stories begin. Today, I want to take you into one of those stories, a story born from hardship, rebuilt through resilience, and powered by a simple but profound idea. If you have ever felt overwhelmed or discouraged, what you are about to hear may shift the way you look at struggle forever. Before we dive into it, I want to invite you to support this channel. A simple like, a quick comment, or hitting subscribe helps us continue creating meaningful content for you. And if this message resonates with you at any point, feel free to share your thoughts below. You never know, your comment might be exactly what someone else needs to see. Now, let us begin the journey. In the lingering shadow of Japan's defeat, the year 1947 felt like an unending winter even when summer came, and a 19-year-old boy found himself standing at the edge of a life that had been stripped bare. The war had taken his father, the family home, and the sense of certainty that once guided every morning. What remained was a small, drafty shack pieced together from fragments of bombed streets, a sickly mother who tried to hide her pain, and a younger sister whose quiet hunger echoed through the nights. Each day began with the same dull ache in his stomach and the same question tightening around his chest. How could someone barely grown shoulder the weight of keeping an entire family alive when the world around them seemed determined to collapse? He woke before sunrise, not because he wanted to, but because sleep no longer brought rest. The sounds of distant reconstruction hammers clacking, carts grinding over broken pavement, voices arguing in exhausted tones told him the rest of the city had risen before him. Tokyo was a landscape of rubble and resilience, a place where hope had to be created from debris. He stepped outside and felt the dry wind brushing over empty lots that once held crowded homes. Food was scarce, rice was rationed, and work was a battlefield of its own, where hundreds of men twice his age fought for a handful of temporary jobs that barely paid enough to buy a cup of barley gruel. Yet he kept walking, driven not by ambition but by the memory of his mother's trembling hands and his sister's tired smile. Some days he found small tasks carrying lumber for carpenters, hauling scrap metal, or cleaning debris from alleyways where shops hoped to reopen. Other days, he returned with nothing but dust clinging to his clothes. Still, he tried to hide the truth, offering his mother a reassuring smile while quietly skipping his share of dinner so she and his sister could eat just a little more. At night, the darkness of the house pressed closer, but he refused to let despair claim him, repeating to himself that survival meant enduring one more sunrise, then another. The city around him was slowly stitching itself back together. He watched former soldiers, widows, orphans, and merchants form makeshift markets along the streets. He saw children his sister's age laughing beside American ration trucks, clutching biscuits they had waited hours to receive. He saw neighbors rebuilding walls not because they expected prosperity soon, but because rebuilding was a declaration that the future had not yet given up on them. These small signs did not erase his fear, but they steadied his resolve. One afternoon, while carrying lumber across a construction site, he overheard two men discussing an expanding repair workshop near Uno Station. Something in him stirred not hope exactly, but a sense of direction. He sought the place out, waited hours for the owner to arrive, and bowed deeply as he asked for any task, any chance at steady work, The owner studied him with a long, tired gaze, then nodded once. It was not a promise of comfort, but it was the first thread of stability he had touched since the war ended. That evening, as he walked home beneath a sky streaked with fading orange light, he felt the quiet shift inside himself. The world was still harsh, the hunger still sharp, the responsibilities still heavy, yet for the first time he sensed he was no longer merely surviving day by day. He was stepping into a role shaped not by tragedy but by determination. And in the soft glow of dusk, he imagined a future where his family could sit together at a real table in a real home, warmed not by memory but by the life he was determined to rebuild from the ruins. Kenji's first days at the workshop were a blur of etching muscles. Splinters lodged beneath his skin, and the overwhelming sense that he was always one mistake away from losing the only lifeline he had found. The repair shop near Uno Station was cramped and dimly lit, its wooden beams still scorched from the fires of the previous years. But to him it felt like a place where life might begin again. The owner rarely spoke, offering only short, practical instructions. Yet Kenji sensed a kind of watchfulness behind the man's silence. It was not until the third week that he finally understood why. One cool morning, as he struggled to lift a panel of warped lumber, an older carpenter stepped out from behind the stacks of tools. His hair was streaked with silver, his hands thick with decades of labor, and his eyes carried the calm weight of someone who had seen hardship and moved through it with quiet acceptance. He introduced himself simply as Sato and, without a word of judgment, showed Kenji how to shift his stance, brace his feet, and lift using his legs rather than the strain of his back. The relief was instant, and Kenji bowed deeply in gratitude. Sato only chuckled, saying the bow should wait until he had done something worthy of it. Then he handed Kenji a hammer and motioned for him to follow. Days unfolded into a rhythm shaped by Sato's patient guidance. The man never raised his voice, never rushed, and never made Kenji feel small for the skills he lacked. Instead, he taught him by example how to smooth a beam with slow, deliberate strokes, how to listen to the grain of the wood before cutting, and how even the smallest task deserved full attention. When Kenji grew frustrated when his hands fumbled or fatigue blurred his focus, Sato would gently remind him of a single word that carried the weight of generations. Ganbaru. It meant more than effort. It meant to endure with spirit, to keep going even when the path felt steep and unforgiving, to hold on to purpose when the world pressed down with doubt. The lesson settled into Kenji's heart slowly, like warmth spreading after a long winter. He realized that Sato was not merely teaching him carpentry. He was teaching him how to stand strong in a life that had been shaken to its foundations. Kenji had spent months believing survival was a matter of luck, of scraping by and hoping tomorrow would be kinder. But Sato showed him that survival also required intention, the quiet decision to rise each day and give whatever strength remained, even when his hands trembled and his stomach tightened with hunger. One evening, after the workshop closed, Sato invited Kenji to walk with him along a canal where the city's lanterns glittered on the rippling water. The air carried the faint scent of dust and new timber from the reconstruction sites nearby. Sato told him that he too had lost his home, that the war had taken more than he ever expected, and that rebuilding had not come from certainty but from choosing to persist even when he feared he had nothing left to give. Kenji listened in silence, feeling the weight of those words settle into him like a foundation stone. From that night on, he carried the idea of Ganbaru not as an obligation but as a lifeline. Each morning he woke with the same hunger, the same pressure to care for his mother and sister. But he faced it differently. Instead of fearing the difficulties ahead, he met them with the determination Sato had shown him. The cracks in the workshop's walls no longer felt like reminders of destruction, but symbols of a structure still standing. Bit bit, Kenji's confidence grew, shaped by the steady rhythm of his work and the quiet strength of the man who believed he could do more than merely endure. As the months unfolded, Kenji found himself stepping into a rhythm that felt almost like a second heartbeat, a steady pulse of effort, correction, and quiet press. At first, every task demanded his full concentration, and each mistake seemed to echo through his thoughts long after the workshop lights had dimmed for the night. But Sato's presence, steady as an anchor, guided him through the moments when frustration threatened to pull him under. The older man never offered empty comfort or exaggerated praise. Instead, he taught Kenji to look directly at his errors, understand their cause, and try again with a clearer mind. Slowly, Kenji began to realize that failure was not a wall but a doorway. And with every attempt, he stepped a little further through it. The workshop itself became a place where he measured time not in days but in small victories. A panel aligned perfectly on the first try, a joint carved with clean precision, a customer returning because the repair he had completed held firm. These wins were modest, yet for Kenji they formed the fragile scaffolding of a confidence he had believed lost forever in the chaos after the war. Each accomplishment felt like reclaiming a piece of himself that had been buried under fear and exhaustion. And as his competence grew, so did his sense of belonging. The tools no longer felt foreign in his hands. They had become extensions of his intent, responding to the control he earned through repetition and focus. There came a day when Sato entrusted him with a full restoration project, something Kenji would never have imagined months earlier. He approached the task with a mixture of excitement and dread, knowing the responsibility it carried. For hours he studied the damaged frame, tracing the lines where the wood had cracked and imagining the hands that had shaped it decades before. As he worked, he moved with a calm he had never felt in his youth, the strokes of his plane steady, the rhythm of sanding almost meditative. When he finished, he stepped back and saw not perfection, but craftsmanship shaped by patience, effort, and a growing mastery of his art. Sato examined the finished piece, nodded once, and told Kenji that the workshop would soon need someone younger to lead the daily work. The meaning was clear, yet the weight of it left Kenji unable to speak. In the months that followed, the workshop became Kenji's world in a new way. Sato's visits grew less frequent as he tended to family matters outside the city, and gradually the responsibility of running the shop rested entirely on Kenji's shoulders. At first, he worried that the absence of his mentor would expose every weakness he still carried. But each morning he opened the doors, greeted customers, repaired their treasured belongings, and discovered that the strength he needed had already been built inside him piece by piece. The lessons Sato had given him, patience, focus, resilience, were now woven into every movement, guiding him even in silence. As word spread of his skill, the workshop began to thrive. People brought not just broken furniture but items tied to memories, trusting him to restore what they feared was lost. Kenji approached each task with the same spirit he had learned on his hardest days, giving his best even when uncertainty lingered. He no longer worked to survive. He worked to honor the journey that had shaped him from a boy overwhelmed by the remnants of war into a craftsman capable of building not just objects, but a meaningful future. And in that quiet, steady success, he finally understood what Sato had meant all along. Perseverance was not merely an act of endurance, but a way of transforming one's life from the inside out. What Kenji did not fully understand during those long months of rebuilding his life was that something deeper than skill was taking shape inside him. Every setback he pushed through, every evening he stayed after closing to practice a joint he still could not carve cleanly, every morning he forced himself to rise despite exhaustion that reached into his bones, all of it was quietly rewiring the way his mind responded to hardship. Years later, he would learn that researchers studying human behavior and the brain had discovered something remarkable. When a person chooses to persist in the face of difficulty, the brain adapts, strengthening the networks responsible for focus, emotional balance, and problem solving. What felt like stubbornness or simple survival was, in truth, the slow construction of resilience at the level of neural pathways. If Kenji had known this at the time, he might have recognized the subtle changes taking place within him. He might have understood why tasks that once seemed overwhelming gradually felt manageable, why mistakes that once crushed his confidence became opportunities to refine his technique, and why the fear that had ruled him after the war began to loosen its grip. But he did not need scientific terms to sense the transformation. He felt it in the steadiness of his hands, in the clarity that emerged when he focused on a complex repair, and in the calm that settled over him whenever unexpected challenges appeared. It was as if his mind had learned to breathe again, expanding instead of collapsing under pressure. There was one particular evening when this shift became unmistakable. A customer arrived just before closing, carrying a broken family heirloom so delicate that Kenji hesitated before agreeing to examine it. Months earlier he would have worried endlessly about failing, imagining disappointment before even touching the piece. But now he felt a quiet curiosity rising within him, a desire to understand the problem rather than fear it. He studied the fractured wood, the fragile joints, the intricate patterns carved by a craftsman long gone, and instead of stepping back, he leaned in. The task required hours of delicate work, and more than once he had to stop, breathe, and rethink his approach. Yet each pause felt purposeful, grounded in patience rather than doubt. When he finally completed the restoration and handed the object back, the customer's expression softened with relief and gratitude. And Kenji realized that the confidence he projected was no longer something he had to force, it had become part of who he was. The scientific world would later call this a growth mindset, a way of thinking that transforms challenges from threats into chances to learn and evolve. Neuroscientists would describe how repeated effort strengthens the brain much like repeated training strengthens a muscle, making persistence a kind of internal architecture that supports a person through life's storms. But for Kenji, it revealed itself through the simple truth that each experience, each failure, each attempt, each moment he refused to give up was shaping him into someone capable of meeting life with steadiness rather than fear. His journey stood as living proof that transformation does not arrive in sudden bursts of inspiration, but in the small, quiet decisions made day after day. The war had taken nearly everything from him, leaving him with a future that felt hollow and uncertain. Yet through the steady practice of showing up, trying again, and refusing to surrender to despair, he built a resilience stronger than he could have imagined. And though he did not know the language of neuroscience, he understood something equally powerful. The mind grows when a person chooses not to retreat from difficulty, but to move toward it with intention. Kenji's journey reminds us that transformation rarely arrives in dramatic flashes of inspiration. It grows quietly, in the spaces where struggle meets intention, where fear meets the choice to move anyway. His life was shaped not by moments of certainty, but by the countless days he stood in the workshop, facing difficulties that would have once made him retreat. Each time he lifted a tool with trembling hands, each time he tried again after a mistake, he strengthened not only his craft, but the inner structure that allowed him to rise after everything had fallen apart. His story is not just about rebuilding furniture or restoring a small workshop. It is about rebuilding the self from the inside out, piece by piece, through choices that seem small yet carry the power to redefine a person's entire path. And so, as his story reaches its quiet conclusion, the true message is not bound to 1947 Japan or to a single life shaped by war. It reaches outward, toward anyone standing in a moment that feels too heavy, too uncertain, or too painful to bear. The world often teaches us to avoid discomfort, to search for quick solutions, to hide from our own fears. But Kenji's life shows another truth. Struggle is not the end of the path. It is the beginning of strength. Pain does not signal defeat. It can become the very fire that reshapes a person's spirit. Fear does not have to stop us. It can become the compass that points toward the places where we are meant to grow. If there is one lesson to carry from his journey, it is this: change begins the moment you decide not to give up, not when the challenge disappears, not when you feel confident, but in the exact moment you choose to keep going, even with doubt in your chest and obstacles in your way. Every act of persistence, no matter how small, is a declaration of who you want to become. Every step forward, even a shaky, strengthens the ground beneath your feet. You do not need to be fearless. You only need to be willing. Thank you for spending this time with this story and allowing it to unfold with you. If it brought you comfort, clarity, or even a spark of motivation, I invite you to support the channel by liking this video and subscribing for more stories that inspire reflection and resilience. Your presence here means more than you know, and your engagement helps these messages reach others who may need them just as much. Let us continue walking this journey together, one choice, one act of courage, and one moment of perseverance at a time.